us in business, the challenge is trying to declare obviously the values of your organisation, and then obviously trying to get a group of people to align with that. So the guys are going to talk to that. We're very lucky to have Toby and Jonah here today, coming from slightly different perspectives, but I don't think they need a huge introduction. You've seen in the material that we sent out in the invite, their backgrounds, and coincidentally we'll send that out as part of the follow-up. We did a podcast with Jonah beforehand, and it's one of the most listened podcasts we've had. There's some great takeaways. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the guys. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, thanks very much, Sean, and thank you to you all for setting the time aside to come along today. Look, just to kick off, I'm curious, who here has organisational values? Stick your hand up. Okay, cool. And who here has had some success with their organisational values? Okay. And who here has had organisational values go so far wrong that they had to leave the country? Okay, that's reassuring. Well, look, I wanted to start with our backstory, and the reason I'm here, and the reason Jonah is here, and the reason that we're here together to talk about this topic. As Sean has mentioned and is in the bio, I played Olympic Games, Athens, water polo, and it was an incredible period of my life, really. It was a dedication of 11 years to get to Athens, and the question that was burning for me at that time was just how good could I be? What would it take for me to be as good as I could be? And that was, whether that's nutrition, strategy, fitness, skill, strength, all of it. Psychology, how could I be as good as I could be as an athlete? And that really drove me. And that drove me Olympic Games, 3 World Championships, various bits and pieces. And then when I came home from Athens, I was wondering, well, what am I going to do now? And what would be the source of that same drive for me? What was going to capture and require everything of me? Because for a few of you know me, I'm the kind of guy who goes all in on various bits and pieces. And so the bit for me was actually I started a business. So my business partner, Adam, and I, we've been friends for 34 years and 15 years in business now, or nearly 15 years, with Blue Wire Media, which is a digital marketing company. And the part that I really found that I loved about that particular journey and ongoing journey as an entrepreneur and business owner was really the team. And it sort of changed my perspective from how good could I be, and of course that continued to drive me and still does, but how good could I make this team? And so that was where we came across Jim Collins' work, Good to Great. Anyone here familiar with Jim Collins' work? Okay, so one of the key principles from that book is this idea of organisational values being a differentiator for the very best companies, the ones that are able to make a transition from good and take it to the next level and be great. And Jim's deep research into that was really fascinating, and so much so that we drank the Kool-Aid and ran down the rabbit hole of organisational values. And we loved it. It was great work. Everything from recruiting and hiring to performance conversations, performance criteria. Our values were showing up in daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly meeting agendas. We had them in the hiring and firing conversations and retiring conversations, strategic conversations around where the business was going. And we actually, I stuck my hand up and I felt we did organisational values pretty well for a small business, and we loved it. And then Blue Wire has gone through many iterations as a business, and it started off, we were a team in West End in physical proximity, and we were growing that team, and that was a really exciting time, to now Blue Wire is a globally distributed team with specialists working on very select areas all over the world, but far less of that connection that for me was the teamwork part and the performance part of that team. And so for me it was actually a bit of a disconnect, and to be frank, I didn't even realise it at the time. Then 3 years ago I found myself sitting on the M1 just outside IKEA, of all places. I hate flat pack furniture. And I found myself bawling my eyes out with frustration and like this sense of real disconnect. And it was across a whole bunch of stuff, and it was a confluence of factors at the time. My second daughter had been born. Any parents in the room with children who've had reflux? It's not great for sleeping. I just had a shoulder operation after 20 years of throwing a ball as hard as I possibly could. It gave away, and that was a super painful experience and much worse than I'd expected. My father-in-law at the time was going through a battle with leukemia, and 6 months prior to that point, my father had died from a brain tumour. And I talk about this not in the context of, call for pity, but actually what was pressure just dialed right up. And my disconnect that had sort of been simmering away under the surface, cracked, to be frank, at that moment. And fortunately, I reconnected with Jonah at around that same time. We started sharing trips. We were working at the Queensland Academy of Sport together. I was there on a secondment for a couple of months. And Jonah and I started having this chat. And Jonah said to me, mate, you might be actually really interested. And we connected on a bunch of stuff too. His father had died 4 years prior to that. And so he said, you might be really interested in this values work that I'm doing with my athletes. Because in service of performance, it's the only thing that I've seen that hangs up and stands up under the duress of people wanting to achieve the very pinnacle of their games. And so I did. I ran down the rabbit hole, read the books, and then have spent really the next three and a half years learning it, coaching it, teaching it, building this stuff together. And really, that to me is now why we've joined and formed a partnership and a new business around how can we build the capacity of other teams and organisations to be their best. And that has been, and is to me, is going to be the burning question for the next decade or so as to how we answer that. And it's been an awesome journey with Jonah, and so thanks Sean for having us both here. And I'll hand over to Jonah just to give you his story and how it comes together.
I always enjoy hearing Toby tell his story, I've heard it many times before. My story is a little bit different. Mine started in jail. Not in some road to redemption tale. When I was doing my Masters in psychology, they were offering placements, and none of the placements were that enticing to me. They were all go and work with underwater croquet or something. And I said to my supervisors, if what you've taught me works, and I'm about to go and hopefully work with the pointy end of the most elite athletes in the world, then send me to jail. Because I reckon there's some pretty extreme personalities there, and I reckon there's a fair bit of entrenched behaviour that's really hard to shift. Higher rates of recidivism. Let's see. I was probably a little bit precocious in my early days. And so off I went. And I ended up spending 8 months in a medium secure prison. And it was really, really ineffective. And so I walked in with my cape, and here I am. There's going to be no inpatient, so I've had my time here. And I fix them all, and off they go. And they'd go out and take their drugs and recommit crime and come back in. And so I'd go back to my professors and say, look, I think I'm just doing something wrong. I'm missing a piece here. And basically the short version of it was, Jonah, you're a straight high distinction kid, you're annoying us, go away, you're doing everything right. I said, in that case, there's something wrong with psychology. There's something wrong with how I've been trained. So I retrained. I went and retrained. And luckily for me, there was sufficient evidence coming through a new framework, which today's not about, but which really was challenging traditional cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's much more around learning to sit with discomfort. And I realised that it's what we do that matters, not what we think and feel. And I was flipping my whole mental model around, and all of a sudden I had this light bulb moment, like, wow, this is really applicable to both the inmate as well as my athletes. Right? Stop trying to teach athletes that the reason they didn't perform well was they were too anxious. Stop telling people that their problem is they're sad. You know, we worry about things we care about. So I started to learn, how about increasing people's capacity, growing their ability to sit with discomfort. The framework's called acceptance commitment therapy, and I was at the front wave of that, and now I've sort of championed the use of that throughout Australia, around the world in performance psychology. And it's really great, it's exciting, and it works, because it really has the foundational concept is so much of what we think about in our day-to-day. I mean, how many interactions have you guys had with an employee who is presenting maybe with some, I don't know, low mood or some angst, and our first approach is, you know, what can I do? How can I make you feel better? Do you need some time off? Do you need, you know, and really, if you look at the sporting context, there really isn't much time off. There isn't that ability. Can we just stop the Olympic Games for a moment? Toby's getting a bit upset. You know? Whereas acceptance commitment therapy says, you know, anxiety is not the problem, sadness is not the problem, anger is not the problem. It's our unwillingness to feel that is the problem. If I don't like feeling anxious, then it shows up, I try to get rid of it, and fail. Now I'm worried and freaking out that I can't get rid of it, and yeah, no wonder you're not focused on shooting the ball or kicking the goal, or that's why people, you know, suffer. So it was a really fun early sort of discovery that how I'd been trained was wrong, and retrained, and just got fantastic outcomes. But the cornerstone of that work is how to get people to do hard things. Everyone knows not to smoke, yet some still do. Everyone knows that I need to shoot the ball under pressure, but a lot don't. You know, what allows human behaviour to change or sustain under pressure? And at the core of that, which we'll unpack today, is the piece around values. A couple of photos just to sort of capture where that work looks really differently. This was me 3 weeks ago at the Open with a client with Tiger looking horrible, and he was horrible. Physically, his back's gone and he couldn't play it. But you know, and these clients allow me to share these stories. I never disclose clients that don't allow me to share, but you know, this is a UFC fighter. Do values work with UFC fighters? There's some obvious ones. Combativeness. Yeah, hopefully that's not at home, it's just in the ring. But this guy wasn't winning fights and hired me to help him through that. And I was sitting with him and saying, what is it about fighting you love? He used to be a very successful team sport rugby player. So what is it about it? He goes, I don't know, Jonah. I sort of feel naked when they close that octagon cage. There's not really any rules. I just feel, really sort of naked, but I love that feeling. I love how scared it makes me. I'm thinking, it's a bit odd to come up with nakedness as a value, but I guess I could roll with that. Right? Anyway, that's just a word. And I said, it sounds like it's a real vulnerability. He goes, I like that word. Yeah, right. So I was like, okay, let's work with that. I said, what does it look like when you're not being vulnerable? He goes, well, I stand away from my opponent because I don't want to get my teeth broken or bones broken or feel pain. I said, oh, how's that work for you? I get really tired, then he tackles me to the ground and punches my head in. I said, so chatting to you and your coach, when are you your best? Oh, when I actually stand closer and do get a few broken teeth and a few broken bones, but that's actually my strength in terms of his fight style. I said, right, so if we actually tap into your vulnerability, it's scarier to move towards that, right? But it actually leads to a better outcome. And of course he went on, we had some success and he won some sort of high profile fights and the like. So why I love values is you can use them in any context and get people to do really hard things, like stand closer to somebody who wants to murder you and feel immense pain. But it also shows that humans that you might judge and think have a certain value set actually have really rich and dynamic and playful and interesting values that we all have in the room. So today we're going to sort of journey through a bit of that relationship of values at an organisational level and maybe challenge a few people in the room, hopefully, around the journey you're on with your organisational value set and how I think there's a critical piece missing that, we're really excited to share that I think is the piece that then allows those organisational values to come to life. I don't have to click on you, but cool.
One point also, I guess, in the early exploration of this, from my standpoint, that I found really interesting was this concept of internal capacity and independence and non-dependence, right? Because when we were talking Jonah doesn't get to step in the octagon with the guy. It's not about being whispering at those moments when it matters the most, but actually freeing the person up and the individual up, or the team for that matter, free them up to do what they need to do when it does matter most. And I found that, and it was sort of this change for me. It was this perspective of seeking externalities, looking for all the advice, reading all the books, listening to podcasts. I mean, I'm a junkie for that stuff. I know a few other junkies in the room on that. But really, what it is actually about was this realisation that it's an internal anchor. And to me, that was sort of the analogy that Jim Collins gave in his book for the organisational values as well. But that for the individual, having the internal anchor for that stuff amidst change is how, and complexity and adversity and all this stuff.
Well, it's sort of shaped. It's shaped the way we've designed our business. Is that Toby and I were chatting away and we're talking about things years ago around this, and I'm like, that's what I do for a living, is build people's capacity, right? Like, my job is to not foster dependence, it's to build independence. And then we sort of started laughing. He's like, the traditional business consulting model is just to get rehired every 18 months and come back into the same organisation. I'm like, but that's unethical. Like, my job is to never be seen again, sort of thing. Like, and so we said, what can we shape that model of intervention with organisations, and literally with people like yourselves. Train up heads of HR and heads of people and culture and exec teams to have this knowledge, so you can then bring it to life and keep it alive for years and years and years to come, not rely on some external consultant to come through. That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. You want to talk to that piece? It's probably a little bit of a redundant point for the room, given I looked at everyone who was here.
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted to flash, the business outcomes of engagement, and again, presumably most of you are familiar with them, but the reduction of the negative consequences and the increase of the positives are just unbelievable, really. To think that single factor can play such a large role in the outcomes and the business outcomes and commercial outcomes of businesses.
It's any context, right? For me, it's 2/10 of a lap in the Formula One team, which is pole position versus 10th, which is millions of dollars of sponsorship. It's deaths in hospitals. It's just really relatable, no matter what the context. Yeah, cool. So let's jump into a bit of stuff. I might just use the whiteboard. We've got a slide that will be the same as the whiteboard for people down the back, so you can see. So typically, in our experience, why Toby asked that question is, most organisations, have some degree of establishing a shared vision. They might have done some really good work around describing their value set, and they've probably defined behaviourally what we do and don't do. And Toby did that exquisitely at his business. A lot of people here put their hands up and said, yeah, we think we've done a good job. So we're going to spend some time unpacking that and looking at the next layer down. But before we do, that's that slide deck. We'll keep coming back to this, right? There's an inner layer which we'll share, but we'll get to that in a moment. I want everybody else to stand up on their feet. Oh yes, growing, what have you. Alright. Looking at the screen, you need to either walk to the left or the right hand side of the room with the image that you identify with most, and no sitting in the middle. Are you a snow person or a sun person? You don't have to move, you don't have to climb over people. Come on, shake it up. Okay, interesting. Wow, interesting. All the Queenslanders. Yeah, sure. A few snowbirds. Very good, very good. Alright. Are we Mexican or pizza? Alright. So now we got some people who like eating Mexican on the beach. We've got some people who don't want a pizza at the snow. Some people are like Mexican at the snow, and you can see now we've got some people in the middle going, I eat both. Maybe a bit more of a difficult one. There's a few murmurs of what criteria. I mean, he's won so many more gold medals, but she's done so much more. connection and the incredulous nature that we look at this cat guy. Yeah? Alright. Come back to your seats. Come back to your seats. So, you know, yes, silly, playful, okay, Jonah, you're annoying me because you made me stand up and move around, but I don't apologise. What does that show, right? It shows we all have a different mental model. Every one of you, every one of your employees, every one of your colleagues, every one of your exec team, at any given point, you know, we all have opinions, attitudes and mental models on how we should lead the organisation, what a good leader is, what a staff meeting should look like, what branding, colours of our values on the wall and typography should look like. We all carry our own mental models. And that's good, that's great, that's the rich tapestry of life. It's about, though, can we create a shared vision? That's the role of your shared vision statement. To say, we know the room's full of people with all diversity and different mental models, but when we put up our shared vision, there's not even one cat guy. The whole room goes to that side. I guess my question is, when you reflect upon your shared vision statement of the organisation, would you have the room split? Would you have the whole room on one side? How do you think you're going to articulating that and getting that through buy-in? So you've really got to start to do, when we help organisations do shared visions, it's about a true shared vision where, yes, we all will have good banter, laugh, and even healthy disagreements about you should be eating Mexican on the beach whilst patting your cat, but you know what? We're all agreeing that this is what we stand for. And that's what we do in sporting organisations and large multinationals. So that's your vision piece. That's your vision piece. Don't minimise it. Don't rush through it. Don't just create a generic statement that doesn't have everybody on board with that in your onboarding processes and the like. Anything to add to that?
No, mate. No.
Now let's get into the values. Here's a lovely cliched image of the perfect American 2.3 family. There's a dog, by the way, to the left-hand side. And they're living life, they're succeeding in life, they're ticking the boxes of life off. They've fallen in love, got married, had the 3 kids and the dog somewhere in the background. She's sleeping with her personal trainer. When mum and dad aren't home, the kids torture the dog. And he's a really cold and disconnected husband because, he's just not into being a parent. When they got married, maybe they did that because they were trying to do something in the service of being loving. Maybe. When do you achieve loving? When do you tick that off? Completed, finished, achieved. If you wake up every morning and say, I'm going to commit to being loving to my partner, that's a daily commitment of the way to live your life. I don't know what she's complaining about. She gave her the wedding, she got the house, got the car, bloody hell. Yeah, they're the goals. They're the things you tick off in life. Whereas values are much more lasting. It's amazing how many people get disconnected from goals and values. But once you can understand the distinction, you can actually have both and do them well. Second metaphor I like to use. Those who've heard me talk before, I always use this one. Twin brothers here, by the way. Twin brothers. Identical twin brothers. Goal-setting machines, annoying people on Instagram, got heaps of followers and they do cool things. One of them, who cares, the guy on the left, has taken the time to connect to his values. You've all got values, we've all got values, everyone has values, just some people have actually taken the time to articulate and connect and identify and be able to really sort of resonate with them. He has. And his other twin brother hasn't. He's just a goal-setting machine. And the guy who's connected to his values, I don't know, let's go with adventure, perseverance, adrenaline and curiosity. They're 2/3 of the way up Everest. They get a phone call from base camp or a radio call rather from base camp saying, gnarly storm coming in, pretty dangerous. Probably got to make a decision which way we go here, guys. Just for a moment, in your head, have a think about what's going to happen for either of those two people. What's going to be their response and what's going to be their inclination of what to do. Could have turned to the person next to you and just make a call on, do they both go up, do they both go down, does one go here, does one go down? What are your thoughts? It's okay, be vulnerable, be wrong. How'd we go? Anyone want to share what they're thinking? Thoughts?
We want to know if they were Siamese twins or not.
Siamese twins, the cat guys. Typically, this is what I see. The guy whose goal setting machine is normally already halfway down the mountain, and he's already retweeted that he's doing the Hawaiian Ironman next month. Goal setting machine people often are quick to evaluate whether their goal could be in jeopardy. They hate failure, so they'll avoid failing, go back down and reset another audacious goal so they can feel like their life is valid and they're moving forward. But you actually look at their history and they've got a whole bunch of failures where they actually haven't gone to the limit. What about the guy who's connected to his values? What might his interpretation even be of the storm? Yeah, challenge. About time it showed up. I didn't go to Mount Kosciuszko, I came to Everest for a reason. It's here to kick my ass, bring it on. Now it's not my value set, I prefer my nose and fingers, and frostbite's not really a thing, so I might go down, but these people continue. So what does that show? It's people who do hard things and persevere, normally do it when they're connected to their own value set. And the final metaphor I love to use, and this one I can hopefully is a bit more relatable. If I went to your recycling bin and got out all the salt block and broke it up on the floor and said, hey, you know what? This guy, he eats motivation for breakfast. He's an Olympian. He's read Jim Collins. And that's why we're here, by the way. Surprise! It's a motivational glass walking seminar today. You didn't realise. So let's all line up and we're going to walk across the glass. It will cut your feet, so please sign a waiver. You'll probably have 3 weeks in pain with stitches and it's going to really hurt. Who's keen? And I'm going to get more expletives. And I say, how about I change one thing? Just one thing. Same glass, same cut, same 3 weeks of pain. But at the end of it, I'll guarantee every one of your dreams, hopes and aspirations will come true. And everyone you love will have a life that's free from harm and suffering. And they'll have a rich and dynamic life too. Would you be more keen to now walk across the glass? So what does that show? It shows humans are crap at pointless pain. Eat your broccoli, why Dad? Go for a run in the morning. We don't do things that are hard unless it's in the service of something meaningful. You want your employees to do things that are hard. You want them to be courageous and use their full intellect. You want them to work over hours and speak up and challenge the status quo when there's fear of a bad decision or danger or a work health or safety issue, or you want them to do hard things. And you're just going to impose your organisational values on them and say that should be enough. And you wonder why you're not getting that sort of data out of your employees. We're going to challenge you around that and say that's probably not enough. Because organisational values are not your individual employees' values. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Anything to add to that, Tops?
No.
Cool. What's the point? So really, it's important to establish your shared vision. It's critical to establish your values, or not. This is a really important one. Or not. There's plenty of companies that actually do not have a value set and are very successful. And that's fine. But the science behind it shows that those that actually differentiate and really go to that next level do have values, so there's actually great science behind it. But it's actually better to either have it and do it really well or not do it. The worst is putting decals on walls and then failing to execute. That's actually worse. And in my experience, I often play around with Toby and say, you know what, maybe we should just not pursue what we're doing and let's just get a decal business. Because there seems to be a heck of an industry about every 5 years going into businesses and peeling off old values and putting up new decals. Anyway, that's just my favourite piece of it. So let's talk about the inner petal of that model. The inner petal of that model. We want to talk about engagement, psych safety and accountability. For those who haven't seen the work around that, it's really important and it matters. And trust. And generating really high trust relationships. And that's what we want to spend the next little piece or period of time on. This model is not our model, it's a model, quite a standard model, and I'm sure a lot of HR people in the room know about this concept. But it really is around looking at your individual employees' own contribution and fulfilment, and then that to the organisation. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to see people who are disengaged. They stand out in the workplace. That's sort of not that hard to see people who are sort of being a bit insidious and just demotivated, not contributing. For me, I think the more danger zone are the hamsters or honeymooners. Yeah, the honeymooners are the people who are due to the organisation. They're flat out. Oh, they're working hard. They're just giving you nothing because they're just busy doing the wrong stuff. Which is why onboarding matters and doing it really well. You've got to watch the crash and burners. Oh, they're my high achiever. They're great to our organisation. They're an A+. They're back to leave organisation. I'm here on stress leave or somewhere else that's got better work conditions. They're giving a lot to the organisation, but they're not getting what they need from it. And obviously we want that sweet spot, right? We want that sweet spot. And I think that's where Toby and I just really connected, right? Around almost in the case of the blinding obvious, this is what we do for a living. Like, he did that as an athlete, and then I do that as a performance psychologist with athletes. It's about dialing up individual, high performance and in the service of the collective. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy that I've been using recently to sort of paint this picture is if you go into any elite sporting organisation, and it does sort of blow me away that I didn't twig until a couple of years ago, but that's okay. You will never ever see an athlete in a team sport that is training exactly the same. So every athlete trains differently according to their strengths, their weaknesses, their motivators. They get coached differently depending on their motivators as well. They have their own nutrition plans, whatever it might be. I mean, when I was playing water polo, I was 10 kilos heavier than I am now, and eating was a full-time job. Because that was what was required of me in my position to be able to withstand, 6'6" Croatians. And that was just part of the job description, really. But that individualisation, and I think the other piece that has been the story I've been using too in this analogy is that it doesn't matter how good your team performance layer is, if you're not getting individual peak performances, your team performance layer is just on top of average, right? So you must be driving individual peak performance to then have a crack at peak team performance. So the two are combined. It's not one or the other. It's both. And I think to me that's sort of the missing piece, and where the individual values plus the organisational values, if you can tap both, man, then you're sitting in a really powerful position in the middle of those circles.
Yeah, and this is just low-hanging fruit stuff. We go to organisations where people go, yeah, my last general manager spoke to me a bit about my 5-year plan. I felt really connected to her because I think she really thought about me and how I could progress. Whereas I've had a conversation like that in years, and you're thinking, yeah, you're expecting this person to come to work and give their all to this organisation. I mean, that just fosters mediocrity. That's you want to see me lose my brain, use the word okay, mediocrity, just okay, fine. Like, that just does my head in. Like, be great or fail trying, but don't go for. Whereas we're actually inadvertently create those conditions in workplaces. And how many hours of our life do we spend coming to work? You want to come and thrive.
And just to add to that too, I see it as the moral obligation, right? Like to me, if the individual is not thriving, then what are they doing here? It's a service to both. Obviously, it sounds a bit self-serving to move the non-performer on, but there's a reason they're not performing, and if they're not thriving, then they have a home. Everyone has a home somewhere. It just may not be with you and your organisation.
It's brilliant when they come to that realisation. 3 weeks ago now, I was in Sydney doing a workshop, and somebody left at lunchtime. The GM who brought me in lied to me and said, oh, he's just got some personal matters. And then as we journeyed through the rest of the day and spoke about all the content and made it a bit more real and vulnerable, he actually came up and said, oh, Jonah, actually just quit. I said, fantastic. He said, yeah. Have you been getting, peak performance out of him? No, not for about 5 years. But he's been fine. He was a good worker. I couldn't fire him because he was fine. Yeah. How great is that? For both parties. Psych safety. People read stuff or seen the videos out there from Google on psych safety. It's important. It matters. It's good science. For me, it's about you've got to never apologise for having high accountability. I work a lot in football land and racing car land and all that stuff, and that's the easy dimension, right? Not performing well, let's just accountability. Yeah, that's good. Never compromise on standards. But there's an independent variable at play, which is psychological safety, the ability to speak up, the ability to actually challenge the status quo, to say you disagree, to say you stuffed up, and feel okay at that. When I go to footy clubs and they have a team meeting and the coach says, pretty good, hey, the boys answered the questions fine. I said, that didn't show me anything. It showed me that the person who knew the answer knew the answer. If we're about to go play Collingwood, I hope the person who doesn't know something should put their hand up and say, I'm a bit confused or I'm lost. But there's obviously a climate here where they don't feel safe enough to speak out. Got to dial that up, Don't worry about Apple, that's low, but what I see in small businesses, family businesses, I know this is live streaming, but government institutions, is a bit of that comfort. Yeah? Go into my land of high performance sport and Toby sport as well, high anxiety. A lot of the finance sector, a lot of the very heavily male-led finance sector, and you see it. But really what matters is that high. Create the conditions where we can speak up, challenge the status quo, admit errors, the old open door policy. I've got an open door policy. I don't see many footprints on the carpet, because there's not the safety to come through and say, I think I just got something wrong. And the response is, okay, what do you need? Oh, that's all? Oh, gee, I've done that 10 times in my younger days. Yeah, sure, cool, relate, connect. Means they're more likely to come to you in the future and tell you versus, I don't want to show my boss I made a mistake, so I'll cover that up, and then you get, in trouble by the board, and then you get thrown under the bus here. It's like, well, no, you got thrown under the bus because you didn't create the conditions where your staff felt safe to come and let you know. So don't blame your staff member, look in the mirror. Which leads to the third pillar. Psych safety and accountability. And then finally, trust. Trust equation is great. It's a nice simple way of unpacking it. Did this presentation the other day to a global tax firm. And of course we put a formula up and then, a formula. But trust matters. Trust matters. I'll make an assumption when I looked at the email addresses of this room that there's probably, I don't know, what do you reckon? I reckon there might be $3 million worth of money spent in this room on personality profiles. I reckon. Might be. You don't change your personality from 16 onwards. You're going to do a personality profile, it helps understand yourself a bit better, and self-awareness matters. But within 3 months of doing that 360 feedback around your personality, you're leading the same way, or the coaching that you've done with your exec team, they're still leading the same way. Why can my idiosyncratic Ange Postecoglou scream and yell and my footy coach carry on like a weird cat and yet get buy-in? Because they have trust. Think about the best people you've been led by, not one personality type. Then you see some weird Russian coach screaming and yelling, and then some young Aussie comes along and goes, oh, I better scream and yell, because that's what that successful guy does, and the playing group go, you're an idiot. Right? It's not your personality. If you understand that engendering high trust allows you to then just be yourself, guess what? You come to work and be yourself. It frees you up. You don't need a 16-point checklist next to your screen on how I need to talk to somebody. Like, that's just defies human psychology and behaviour and science. But you've got to engender high trust. Now, what does the formula work? Credibility. You've got to be good at what you do. The reason Liverpool spend $60 million on a football coach, it's not because he's a genius of football. It's 4-4-2 or 4-3-3. It's a pretty simple game. It's they're buying credibility. It's very easy to break credibility. We all know Giuseppe the Stonemason. I know this has been live streamed here, Sean, so I'll behave for this one. But you know, the stonemasons in Sardinia building a bridge, and somebody comes up and says, what are you doing, Giuseppe? He says, I'm building a bridge to get over the water so the kids can go to school. And oh, wow, amazing. And I built that fence to keep the goats out of the vegetable patch. And I built the church so people could pray and mourn their loved ones. And I spent 30 years building this town from my hands. And you must be revered and known as Giuseppe the Stonemason. You go, you think so, but you sleep with one goat. We've all breached trust. We've all had leaders who've breached trust. It's really hard to repair. So credibility matters. Thought I got away with that without using expletives. Made me nervous there. Reliability. Please only do what you can deliver on. In our fast-paced world, I see too many leaders saying, yes, I'll meet you for that performance review. Yes, we'll catch up for a coffee. Yes, I gotta say. And not delivering on it, and then you're that bloke who doesn't show up to the barbecue. We've all got one. Hey, Mako, we're having a barbie next week for, yeah, I'll be there. He's not coming. We all know he's not coming. We've all got a mate who's that person. Don't be that leader. Don't be that leader. Intimacy, weird, funny word. What is intimacy? Intimacy is sharing your vulnerability, sharing yourself, being fallible. We think in leadership positions we need a Superman cape and armour and have all the answers. You might have to say things like, I don't know, let me find out. Oh yeah, I've made that mistake before. Or give a bit of yourself. That makes your staff trust you because you're human and more likely to come back to you. And obviously the mathematicians in the room, it's a denominator of self-orientation. How much of every interaction I have is transactional and about me getting that data from you to make myself look better to senior management of the board, or how much is my orientation just to you? What do you need? What can I do to help you with your job? Anything I need to, so you're orientating to them. That's what engenders high trust. So really when you can create the conditions of establishing really clear organisational values, a shared vision that is a vision, that understands there's such differences within your team, but we have one thing that unites and brings us together, and the behaviours critique, like what we do and don't do. But then go to a deeper level around it's quite top down, senior leadership down, critical nodes of influence. Can we really truly understand each employee's personal value set and what journey they're on and what wakes them up in the morning and what really matters, and then they can identify that this is a place that I can come to work, and if I bring my own value set to life, that in turn will serve the value set of this organisation, or not, and leave. Either way, it's really good. When you onboard people, spend the time to identify and connect to who they are and what their values are, and is that in alignment for your organisation? It takes a bit more time, but you have far less turnover and greater growth and retention and what have you. It's worth the time. Do you have leaders that truly understand creating the conditions of psych, safety and accountability and engendering high trust relationships? For me, the work that I've done and the work Toby's done and reflected upon his journey as being see organisations embarking on really well-intentioned values work, and they execute it quite exquisitely, then don't necessarily go to that next layer down. Back to that metaphor, you're going to ask your employees to walk over broken glass. I won't walk over broken glass for somebody else's values. I'll walk over it for my own. I'll jump in front of a car for my daughter if she's on the road and there's a car coming. I'll feel immense pain in the service of things that are meaningful to me. You've got to take the time to find what that is for each employee and then show them that being at this place allows those to come to life. That's when you get engagement. That's what we call high performance. And
I was reading recently Andy Groves, the CEO and former founder of Intel, who obviously as a business case study is an extraordinary company. And one of the things that he said in his management sort of philosophy is that a manager's time is all about high leverage. What is the highest leverage? And by leverage he meant what is something that's going to have an impact on the people I'm managing for a long period of time. If the timeliness, there are a number of different factors. But to me, and he specifically calls out performance reviews as part of that, because he says, 2 hours with one person in my organisation has a flow-on effect through many others and a ripple effect that can actually amplify the performance of the whole organisation and the output of the organisation. And so to him, a performance review he considered high leverage. To me, this stuff is insanely high leverage, incredibly high leverage. The 2 hours that you spend unpacking someone's values, having them connect to their own, set up a vision for themselves, understand what they actually do when they're at their best, and that they are going to be then held to and monitored for and praised for and celebrated with. That to me is just such a powerful proposition. And in terms of values and talking to this, when we started to sort of have these discussions, Jonah and I, like the realisation for me was like, if I could, I have 2 daughters, they're 5 and 3, and if I could leave one thing behind, actually, this framework is actually what I want to leave. Like I could basically draw it up on a napkin, and if I could empower them to have the tools to live this kind of life. I love the goal setting, and I love the goal setting in service now of values. Is something we talk about. And to me, that's why, back to that burning question, how can we make other teams and other organisations and individuals as well really connect to what they're doing? Because to me, we're all facing incredible complexity, challenges with the work environment, the environment itself. I just got terrified by a documentary about AI the other day, which is fascinating. But we are facing these challenges, and we need like the absolute best of everyone that we possibly can draw on, and the resources to accomplish these sorts of things. And whether that's in a day-to-day work environment or more broadly in the community, to me, it's just unquestionable that this is just massively high leverage stuff. And so, appreciate the time you guys have invested here today. And thank you.
Thanks, Doc. I'd love to have questions and conversations further. We've got, how much time do we have back? Perfect. Yeah, let's open up the floor and have a conversation.
Anyone have any questions? I'll start with one.
Yes.
How do you? What's the process? Thanks, mate. What's the process that you guys embark on to help individuals define their own values? Similar to maybe the example you gave us at the start with the UFC fighter.
Yeah, at its simplest, it starts with a digital tool to explore the question: what are your values? And it's amazing. I've done this work now with a lot of people and as individuals as well as teams, and I had never answered that question until 3 years ago, which blows my mind actually. And a lot of people haven't. So it starts with that, and then a digital tool helps you sort of walk through what a value set might look like for you, and then asks a couple of prompts to really question that value set, and then at the end of it, you have a working draft. And to be frank, when I started this process with Jonah, coaching me through it, it was, it took probably 6 months to get to. I had my first working draft in an hour, and then refined it from there. Started off with 12 or 15, and now I'm back to 5. That have really resonated and switched one or two out over that time as well. But yeah, I mean,
the answer is also, I mean, it's, without getting too much of the nitty-gritty of the last 4 years, is where, me in private practice land as a psychologist, we use, paper and pencil, basically. Here's 400 things we could explore, or flip cards, and and then Toby's background in IT and all that stuff, we have a beautifully executed digital thing that employees can use an app on their phone, and it's really cool. So, lots seamless, much more seamless.
So Toby and Jonah, thanks for that. It was fascinating. So with the North framework, what is the engagement model, and like if you take a traditional large enterprise, a CEO will have all those things that you've driven up, and it's on the walls, like you said. So how do you guys get engaged with a business, and how do you work through that from the different levels?
Yeah, sure. Quite very much a top-down model, but you can speak up if you want.
No, I mean, anyone here? Sorry. No, it's on. It was on.
On.
It's not anymore. Anyone here familiar with sort of agile or Scrum methodologies? Yeah. Okay. So really, maybe I'm back. Anyway, so the model is really, doesn't matter. So the model is really a mirror to that Scrum model, which is to take to certify individuals, to take the skills back into organisations, to train the individuals within to become champions of the change that's required, to hand them the tools that they need to execute and unpack this one-on-one with their team. And I mean, to us, it's there's only so much bandwidth. Like two guys can't actually service that many people. I mean, if we want to get to have the impact that we want and take millions of people to reconnect them with what is most important to them, requires an army, frankly. And
So effectively, we do a train-the-trainer where we get key people in every organisation. So typically that's the exec team, and then heads of HR, people and culture, or alike, that you help identify who they would be. And then we end up doing a train-the-trainer all the way through to a master trainer level, if you want, where then you own it, you get the slide decks, the things, the training material, and it's your organisation, it's your people. You should be the ones driving that. So you feel empowered to keep running that. Back to the psychology model of, planned redundancy, or whatever you call it, planned obsolescence or whatever. Like, we shouldn't have to see you. We should be able to empower you guys to then to continue that. To the point where if you have a new person coming into your organisation, if you've done sufficient training, then you can train them through it as well. Yeah. With all online support and digital tools. Yeah. I've got a bit of content.
Quick question. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was really insightful, given both your background. I'm really interested in, if you had one end of the spectrum is you guys doing something that's very personal and engaging. On the other end of the spectrum is that top-down stuff, like, an example might be something like Culture Amp, where it's top-down driven, organisational, get the pulse of it, fix for that, or solve for that. To me, that is quite the opposite to what you guys do. Could you talk a little bit about those tools? And obviously, organisations throw them at people because it might be the newest thing, and if you collect data and you do all sorts of other things. Do you see a place for those? Because from an affordability perspective, a 2x2 matrix would put you guys in one quadrant. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's a great question. Assessing, engagement and doing pulse surveys and looking at all that stuff's really important. There's a real place for that. Do you want to speak more around that at all? You've looked into some of those, guess what's out there?
To me, it's a human overlay to the technology level. So there are heaps of platforms, 15.5, Culture Amp, these ones that are measuring engagement, driving review cycles, and actually they do a great job then of gathering the data around how well is a person. I was sitting down with a client yesterday, helping them set up their performance review schedule, where they're asking the question of a team in a 360 environment, how well is this person living the core value that we have now recently established? And so I don't think it's necessarily at the exclusion of it. I actually think that the data is fascinating, and the human layer combined with the data is a really powerful proposition. where it sits at this stage is still fairly early days, but yeah, I mean, to me it's a toolkit to help managers and people like exec coaches or anyone interested in the performance space to go in and make lasting change. So then the technology tools will continue to drive that change and monitor the effectiveness.
So I've had a lot of success with change models, and I've usually used process ADCAR model, which has felt worked really well, particularly with change champions who are influencers, not necessarily from a top-down approach, but using those influences that other staff can relate to. I'm with a new organisation at the moment, and we've got a history there of it's a fairly remote, so it's a global organisation. Those people who are just not going to shift, so they're already in a negative space. So to take them on that journey for the vision, they look at the vision. We've had a recent change in vision, and they will look at that and go, yeah, bullshit. Right? That's not going to happen. Don't believe it. So what do we, apart from the obvious, what do we do with those people? How could we turn them? Could we turn them? I'm not a great believer that we can.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? I probably need to know a bit more about the context and what have you, but the obvious is the obvious. I mean, yeah.
Particularly when they're, we have a Sydney head office and a senior office here. These people in remote locations. And they're in management, so they're influencers on that team underneath them. So that negativity would be going through that team. We're never going to be able to turn that team while they're there. So obvious, right?
Yeah, but if it's framed around performance conversations and you've got heavy expectations of what we talk about and the lack of buy-in to that, and you've got courageous leadership where people are learning to be more comfortable being uncomfortable and actually go there and call it out, it normally becomes a pretty uncomfortable place for them to come to work because it's really obvious that this is not for them. Sometimes it's just about holding them to account and moving them out, but it's actually pretty cool when you sit down with somebody, work through it, and they come to that realisation that no one generally wants to wake up, hop out of bed and be a prick. But yet, you know what, I am. I'm cantankerous and I'm not. And it's like, is that what you want? Is that what you want the next 20 years to look like?
And it's not really about their behaviour being prick, it's more about I'm right
and
they're wrong.
Yeah, being insidious or undermining. Yeah, and having that question around how's that in the service of our shared vision and value set? So you're taking a paycheck, and in doing so, you're saying you want to be an advocate of our shared vision and values, yet you're clearly not. So let's have a conversation around what's going on there.
So that's got it. And that's what hasn't been happening, so that's got it.
And you say that you're really a caring, curious, creative person, and you explore, and at home you're a great dad, and you do that. And I'm just wondering why there's a disconnect with your true value set and what you bring into the workplace.
Well, thank you.
Right. Open to anything, really. You've got a huge amount of intelligence and experience in the room. Is this relatable? Do you guys find that you do a lot of anything? There we go, just wanted to check. I just see such effort and well-intentioned resources being put into trying to get the staff to buy into the shared vision and values, and maybe we need to make the font brighter, and maybe we need to put it on the letterhead. Maybe it's like, maybe you need to actually do the next layer down and then make them realise this is a place I want to be at or not. I can be myself, I can live my values, and in doing so, me living my values absolutely aligns to what the organisation's values set up. There's some differences, but in doing so, I can bring it to life.
Just a quick one, you guys, your tool sounds like a great one, Toby. Have you guys partnered with organisations to use that tool in the recruitment process? So if an organisation's got values and then passing that to the individual to go through that process to see if there's alignment at the front end of the relationship rather than the back end.
Really interesting and topical. Two conversations in the last 48 hours. One around running any new hire, basically through a personal vision, values, and behaviours process. So then managers know how better to manage them. So they know why they're there and connected to the work or not. I'm not too sure yet as to whether you can ask that of someone who actually hasn't signed up to a contract. But to me, hence why we've taken it to the onboarding level so far, but haven't extended it into the recruitment process. Although you're probably better qualified to answer that, but it would be like, to me, it's super interesting as a jump-off point to deeply know a member of your team, and provided, of course, there are other conditions of safety and trust and that sort of stuff in it. Then
it's a tricky one. I've spent 16 years recruiting in AFL, so profiling all the draft, future picks and all of that, and they just lie.
I was going to ask. That's the rest.
Wrong guy answering the question.
I get emailed 5 different psych profiles that some company has sold to the AFL around personality, values, and what have you, and I'm basically, you're 16, you're 17, and you're going for the job to be an AFL player. Don't tell me you've got high on hard-headedness, conscientiousness, team orientation, and work ethic. Like, oh wow, it's as we know, doing some of that profiling to screen in is actually fraught with, is invalid. So it's hard.
Makes sense.
But in the interview, training up heads of HR and how to diagnostically interview for values through your questions, it can come out.
For sure.
And then you
What's
start
the body language?
and what they're into and you can start to learn to sort of get a sense of someone's value set. Through good behavioural diagnostic interview.
Hey guys, you started with a vision, so have you got any insight into what a good vision looks like, or creating a vision that makes it easy for people to buy into?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, again, over the nearly 20 odd years, we've got a 5-question probe that we do to set up things around trust, standards, legacy, so we have a process that elicits that in a really fun way of getting people to pull out the shared mental model of each person, and then you see this overlapping Venn diagram and strip it all back, and what you're left with is people normally looking going, there's a bit of me in that, a bit of my DNA's in that, now you got me because I actually contributed versus here's our vision. And we look at it as a very generic statement, so it does take time, and you've got to take the team through about a half-day workshop through that, depending on the size. But it's a fun little, one of my favourite pieces of the work we do is seeing people's response when you take them on that journey to actually create something that they want to stand for. Anyone else in the room?
We're getting the wrap-up signal up the back. So one more question if there is one.
We're going to stick around for the next 10 or 15 or however long we have the room, so feel free to come up and have more candid
There's another
conversations.
question, maybe just one last one. Have you got any examples, obviously notwithstanding privacy and that sort of thing, of examples where you've gone into organisations, maybe helped them, and any of that, you pointed to some of the tangible sort of benefits of engagement and whatnot. Any sort of examples you can share where you've gone into an organisation, gone on a journey and sort of come out the other side?
Have to be really careful around confidentiality. Got to be really careful around confidentiality. I think one of the there's certainly a motorsport team I've worked with, which would be an example of, and the cool thing around that was we had a $216 million budget, a really highly talented suite of drivers. Didn't have success in the first year. Normally that means you clean out a lot of people and what have you, but we actually kept the quorum and then changed the way I was first engaged to work just with the driver to help, and have a look at the whole way of working. Made some changes and went and won the World Championship in Le Mans. And so you see a real shift in performance with the same budget, same people, same thing. So I love seeing those direct, tangible outcomes, and what I think we bring from elite sport is it's very evident. Outcomes. And then there's plenty more obviously in the more traditional corporate setting, but I wouldn't want to disclose that for obvious reasons. Thanks for your time, guys. I know it's a big piece of your working day, so thanks for coming along.
Thank you. Might not be on.
guys for today. I think there's a lot of key takeaways and a lot to sort of process, but I think there's plenty of aha moments for me. I took a lot of notes myself. I like, just a few I'll touch on, I like that sort of balance, getting that balance right of psychological safety and accountability. I think that's an interesting one, and I think that's maybe a question I've asked in the past, and ironically in the room today we've got Naomi, who has done a lot of work around psychological safety, so maybe we'll include that. Just the podcast we did defining that, but I think it's an interesting sort of relationship there, so I think that's it's a good thing to touch on. Obviously for those that are fairly tangible or formula orientated, having that formula for trust, I think it makes sense for the logical people in the room, for something that's maybe hard to define. I think just the power and the upside when you do get alignment and the enjoyment of those people that are part of those organisations. And I think defining your values is true for your business career, but living your values in life, your tool arguably could be used just to define your own personal values, and if you live your life in accordance with those values, it's going to be a more enjoyable journey in that regard. So I think that's great. Obviously the digital tools or the frameworks that you guys have got help de-risk or make it a more efficient process trying to define your visions, your values. I know being part of those exercises in the past, they can be fairly laborious, and you know where you want to get to, you're just not sure how to get there sometimes, so evidently some of your frameworks play a big part of that. So can you all join me with saying thanks to the guys for their
Grab a nibble, a glass of water, have a chat.